My girlfriend said, "I can replace you anytime I want. Don't forget that." I smiled and let her leave. Months later, she tried coming back after realizing she couldn't replace what she lost with anyone else. "I can replace you anytime I want. Don't forget that." She said it so casually, like she was reading something off a grocery list. Not screaming, not crying, just flat, certain, like she'd already decided I was disposable and was doing me a favor by letting me know ahead of time. I looked at her for a long moment, and then I smiled. Not the fake, nervous kind of smile men give when they're trying to keep the peace and don't know what else to do. A real one, because in that exact second, something clicked inside me that I can only describe as relief. She mistook it for weakness. She always did. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, standing there in my kitchen, arms crossed, that familiar look of superiority arranged on her face, was that she had just handed me the key to a door I didn't even know I'd been locked behind for the past year. I didn't say anything more. I just let her leave. And what happened in the months that followed? That's the part she never saw coming. You have to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I wasn't some passive, suffering type who'd been quietly enduring abuse in the corner. I genuinely loved her. Not the desperate, clingy kind of love that needs constant reassurance, but the deep, settled kind. The kind that makes you build things with someone in your mind. A future, a shared rhythm, a home that feels like a home because the right person is in it. We had 2.5 years together. 2.5 years of Sunday mornings making breakfast, of knowing exactly how she liked her coffee. Oat milk, no sugar, just a little cardamom. Of inside jokes nobody else in the world would ever understand. I knew the way she laughed when something actually caught her off guard. A real laugh. Nothing like the polished one she used for her camera. I knew the way she got quiet when she was stressed, before she'd admit it to anyone, even herself. I knew her, and for a long time, I believed she knew me the same way. But somewhere along the road, something had shifted, and I'd been so focused on holding things together that I hadn't stopped long enough to ask myself a simple question. Why was I the only one doing the holding? The apartment felt empty after she walked out that night, but not in the way I expected. I'd braced for the wave. The grief. The panic that comes when something big ends. Instead, there was quiet. Strange, wide, unexpected quiet. I didn't realize it then, but that moment in the kitchen changed everything. Not because of what she said, because of what I finally stopped pretending I hadn't already known for months. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 28 when all of this happened. Vanessa and I had been together since I was 25. She was a year younger, 27, when things finally came apart. We lived in the same city, had our own apartments, had spoken loosely about eventually moving in together. That conversation had been drifting further and further away for a while. I just hadn't let myself fully sit with what that meant. Let me take you back about a year before that kitchen night, because this didn't come out of nowhere. It never does. When Vanessa and I first got together, she was warm in a way that made you feel genuinely seen. She remembered little details. The name of my college roommate I'd mentioned once in passing, a coffee shop I'd said something good about, the date of a work presentation I'd been nervous about. She'd text me the morning of the presentation, "You're going to be great. Don't overthink it." She showed up in the small ways, not in grand gestures, inconsistent, quiet ones. That was what got me. I'm not someone who falls easily. I've always been careful, maybe too careful, if I'm honest. But she got through. And for the first year, everything between us was good. Better than good. Then she started her social media page. I want to be careful here, because I don't want this to sound like I'm blaming a platform or a career path. But I watched something happen to her across about 8 months that I couldn't quite name in real time. It started small. She began building a following. Lifestyle content, outfits, restaurant reviews, travel posts, the kind of things that photograph beautifully. Nothing that seemed dramatic at first. Tens of thousands of followers, then slowly creeping toward 100,000. And with that came attention. A lot of it. Men in her comment sections. Brands sliding into her messages. PR packages arriving at her door. Invitations to events she'd never been invited to before. I was proud of her. Genuinely proud. I told her that, more than once. But I started noticing things. The way she'd check her phone mid-conversation and not fully come back from wherever it took her. The way plans we'd made together would quietly get shifted because something came up, a content opportunity, a brand event, a dinner with people she needed to meet. I adjusted. Because you adjust for people you love. That's what being in a relationship means. But then, Gradually, the adjustments became expected, and then they became invisible. She stopped asking if I minded. She stopped checking in to see if the rescheduling was okay with me. And when I'd bring something up, gently, carefully, the way you do when you're trying to be honest without starting a fight, she'd look at me with an expression I'd never seen on her before we hit that 8-month mark. Like I was being difficult, like I was the problem, like my feelings were an inconvenient variable she hadn't accounted for. I remember the first time it hit me like something physical. We'd had plans on a Saturday, nothing elaborate, just a full day together, something we'd actually started calling No Phone Saturdays because she had been the one to suggest it. Her idea, her language, her initiative. I'd rearranged my whole weekend around it. She texted me at noon. Hey, something came up. Brand event tonight, pre-event lunch today. Can't miss it. We'll do next week instead. No call. No apology in the tone of it. Just a text. After a full day I'd been looking forward to for a week. I stared at my phone screen for a while, and then I typed back, okay, have fun. Because what else do you say? What I didn't say was, this is the 3rd time this month. What I didn't say was, you were the one who suggested no phone Saturdays. You were the one who said we needed more intentional time together. You brought this up. I swallowed it. And I told myself it was a season. That she was building something real, and building things takes sacrifice. That I could be patient. I was patient for a long time. But patience without acknowledgement starts to feel like invisibility. And invisibility starts to feel like you don't exist. There was a dinner in October that I keep coming back to. Her friends were in town. 2 of them she hadn't seen in months. We all went out to a rooftop place she'd picked. Nice spot. I was quiet through most of it. Not uncomfortably, just genuinely listening, being present, occasionally adding to the conversation when it made sense. And then one of her friends, a woman named Brooke, leaned over to me at a low moment in the noise and said, quietly, with a kind of genuine curiosity that caught me off guard, does she always talk to you like that? I turned to Brooke. Like what? She looked slightly uncomfortable. Her eyes shifted away. Never mind. Sorry. It was nothing. She smiled and redirected herself back to the group. I smiled too and let it drop. But I thought about that exchange the entire drive home. Like what? I hadn't consciously registered anything specific during the dinner. But when I started actually replaying it, slowly, honestly, the way Vanessa had cut me off twice mid-sentence to redirect the conversation to herself, the way she'd corrected me about a small detail from a trip we'd taken together, gently, in a laughing tone, but in front of everyone, with that particular laugh that isn't quite a laugh. The way she'd put her hand on Brooke's arm to pull her attention away while I was still in the middle of a story. None of it had registered consciously in the moment, but Brooke had registered it. And once I saw it, I could not unsee it. I didn't bring it up with Vanessa that night. I told myself maybe Brooke had misread the dynamic between us. I told myself I was reading too much into a few gestures. But that small seed had been planted in the ground. And in the weeks after that dinner, I started paying a different kind of attention. Not suspicious attention. Not surveillance. Just honest attention. The kind that doesn't flinch. And what I saw made something go cold and very quiet in me. She had started talking over me in group conversations, not aggressively, just smoothly, like it was effortless. Like my sentence had simply been an inconvenient pause before she was ready to speak. She had started making jokes at my expense. Small ones. Harmless on the surface. But they always landed in the same place. Me being too serious. Me being too structured, too routine-driven. Me being a little boring. Ha. He still uses a physical planner. Can you believe that in this day and age? Ha. He was in bed by 10:30. He texted me good night from under the covers. Ha. He's such a homebody. You know how he gets. Every joke got a laugh from the room. Every laugh made her shine just a little brighter. And I was always the prop she used to do it. I'm not someone who needs to be the center of attention in a group. I've never been that person and I don't want to be. But being the consistent punchline in the mouth of the one person who's supposed to know you better than anyone, that settles into you differently. That particular thing burrows Indiana. I had a conversation with my friend Qley around that time. Late October, maybe early November. Qley and I had known each other since university. He's not someone who dramatizes things or reaches for the emotional interpretation first. If anything, he undersells. He's the kind of person who says, that's not ideal, when things are genuinely terrible. We were having coffee at his place. He asked how things were going with Vanessa. Fine, I said. Automatic. The word out of my mouth before I'd even processed the question. He gave me a look. What? I said. You said it the same way you say fine when something's wrong with your car, but you haven't dealt with it yet. I laughed, but I didn't correct him. Cole said, she said something to you at your birthday. I've been wanting to ask you about it for a while. My birthday had been about 2 months before that conversation. Small gathering, 9 people at my apartment. I'd cooked. Vanessa had brought wine and an expensive gift that felt slightly impersonal, like something chosen from a curated list without much thought behind the specifics. She'd been on her phone more than I'd anticipated that evening. What did she say? I asked Cole. He wrapped both hands around his mug and considered how to say it. She was talking to Theo and Petra. I was nearby, not eavesdropping, just nearby, and she said, he's a great safety net. Very stable. Very reliable. He paused. She said it like she was describing a feature, not a person. I didn't say anything. But the way she said it, Cole continued carefully, wasn't a compliment. It was like a description of furniture. Useful furniture, but furniture. Safety net. I turned that phrase over and over in my head for the rest of that day. Stable. Reliable. A great safety net. Not, he's kind. Not, he makes me feel like myself. Not, I love spending time with him. Not, he's the person I reach for when things get hard. A safety net. I went home that evening and looked at my relationship with genuinely new eyes. And what I saw wasn't a woman who was deeply in love with me. It was a woman who had decided I was useful. And that is not the same thing. That is not even close to the same thing. The first time she said something I couldn't rationalize my way past. It was a Tuesday evening in November. We were at her apartment. She'd had a long day, a brand meeting that had gone sideways, and I'd come over with food from her favorite Thai place because that's what I did. I showed up when she needed someone to land on. I listened. I made her laugh. I did the dishes without being asked. I was very good at being there for her. And then she was on her phone again, probably responding to DMs, and I reached over gently, lightly touched her arm, and said, "Hey, can we just have tonight? No phone for an hour." She looked up at me. There was a flicker of something in her expression, barely contained. Not quite annoyance, more like impatience. Then she smiled. But it wasn't warm. It was managed. "You know," she said, setting her phone face down on the cushion with deliberate slowness, "sometimes I feel like you need too much from me." I kept my face still. "I don't think I asked for very much," I said. Quietly. "That's what you think," she said. Like I was missing something obvious. Like she was being patient with someone who simply didn't understand yet. I didn't argue it. We put something on TV, but I barely registered any of it. I need too much. I had driven across town with food because she'd had a hard day. I had asked, once, quietly, for an hour of actual presence. And that was too much. I lay awake that night doing an honest inventory of the past several months. How many times had I actually asked for something? How many times had I reached for something real and then pulled my hand back before she noticed? The math wasn't what I expected. I had been asking for very little. She had just grown so accustomed to giving nothing that even the smallest ask felt like a demand. December had a particular kind of pressure. The holidays do something to a relationship. They either draw you together or they pull the existing threads apart. For us, it was definitively the latter. She mentioned her family's Christmas gathering once, about 2 weeks before. "My mom asked if you're coming this year." "I was planning to," I said. "Unless you'd prefer I didn't." A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. "No, it's fine. Come. It's fine. Come." The warmth was overwhelming. I went anyway. It was technically fine. Not like the year before, when her dad and I had talked for almost 2 hours after dinner, and her mother had hugged me goodbye at the door. This time I kept catching Vanessa checking her phone under the table at dinner. Her mother caught my eye once across the table and gave me a look I couldn't entirely decode. Something between sympathy and apology. On the drive back, Vanessa was silent for 20 minutes. Then she said, "I think I need more space in general." I kept my eyes on the road ahead of us. "More space," I repeated. "I just feel, I don't know, like I'm not fully myself lately. Like I'm compressed somehow." "Do you mean more space for me specifically? Or from life in general?" Pause. "I don't know yet." And that was it. She didn't define it further. Didn't suggest a break. Didn't break up with me. Just dropped it there and left it. Like a door left slightly open without explanation. What I know now, looking back, is that "I need more space" is a test balloon. Some people say it because they genuinely mean it. They're overwhelmed. They need breathing room. They're asking for something real. Some people say it because they want you to chase. They want the reassurance of you reaching for them even as they're pulling back. And some people say it because they're already somewhere else in their head. They're giving you notice without the confrontation. They're easing themselves toward an exit without having to admit they're already at the door. I didn't know which kind this was, but I felt the weight of it settle in the car between us. January came. She landed a brand partnership, a big one, a company I'd actually seen advertised places. Not a small creator deal, a real one. She was ecstatic in a way I hadn't witnessed in months. I took her out to celebrate. A nice dinner, somewhere she'd mentioned wanting to try. And for one evening, she was herself again. The early version. Laughing without manufacturing it. Present. Reaching across the table to touch my hand because she wanted to, not as a gesture. I thought, maybe it was just a rough season. Maybe this is the reset. Maybe now that things are coming together for her, she'll have room to come back to us. I held on to that evening for too long. Because 2 weeks later, she introduced me to someone at a mutual friends gathering. And the way she did it stopped me completely. Not my boyfriend. Just my name. This is, and then my name. Like we were two people who happened to know each other. Like there was no context to offer, nothing to define. The person she'd introduced me to glanced between us with slight confusion, nodded, and moved on. I didn't say anything in the moment. But later, on the walk to the car, I brought it up. Hey, earlier, when you introduced me, you didn't say boyfriend. She was looking at her phone. When you introduced me to your friend's colleague, you just used my name, not boyfriend. She looked up. Does it matter? I think it does, yeah. She sighed. One of those long, patient sighs. The kind that implies you're being exhausting. I didn't think to say it. It wasn't intentional. It felt like a thing. You're overthinking. And there it was. You're overthinking. The universal silencer. The phrase specifically designed to make you question your own clear perception. The thing people say when they don't want to engage with the thing you're actually saying. I let it go that night. But it was one thread too many. The fabric was coming apart, and I could feel the air coming through the gaps. February. About a month before the kitchen night. I found out secondhand. Cole sent me a screenshot without a caption. It was a clip from a live she'd done, a Q&A with her followers. Someone in the chat had asked, "Are you seeing anyone?" She had laughed, that particular laugh, polished and camera ready, and said, "I'm keeping that private for now. Let's just say I have options." I have options. I stared at that screenshot for a very long time. She had been in a committed relationship with me for over 2 years. And on a public live, to tens of thousands of people, she'd answered that question with, "I have options." I didn't call her. I didn't text. I sat with it in a way I'd never let myself sit with anything related to her before. And I started doing something I should have been doing for months. I started being genuinely, unflinchingly honest with myself about what this relationship had actually become, about what I'd been excusing and minimizing and rationalizing away, about what I'd been slowly trimming from myself to fit into a space that kept getting narrower. When I finally brought up the live, it was 2 days later. She came over, walked in bright and easy, like everything between us was completely ordinary. I made coffee, and then I said, without drama or volume, "I saw the clip from your Q&A." She paused. Barely. "Oh, I have options," I said. She set her bag down on the chair. "It's content," she said. "It's for engagement. Followers don't want to hear, 'I have a steady boyfriend at home.' That's not interesting to them." "Boring," I said. She blinked. "What? You called him boring?" "The steady boyfriend. The one at home." Something shifted in her face. "You know what I mean. It's not about." "I do know what you mean," I said. "I think I know exactly what you mean." She looked at me, and for just a second, barely a flash, something moved across her face that wasn't confidence. Not guilt exactly. More like the expression of someone who's been caught with an honest thought they didn't intend to say out loud. She recovered fast. "You're not seriously upset about a live stream, are you?" "I'm upset about what it tells me," I said. "And what does it tell you?" I looked at her for a long moment. "That I'm an option for you, not a choice." The room went very quiet. She didn't argue, and that silence was almost worse than if she had. That conversation should have cracked something open. It should have been the real reckoning, the honest, difficult conversation we'd needed to have for months. Instead, she hugged me. She said she was sorry if it had come across the wrong way. She said she loved me. She kissed me on the forehead like she was managing a situation. And I let her, because I still wanted to believe there was something worth saving. But something had hardened in me after that night. Not coldness. Something quieter than that. Clarity. Over the weeks that followed, I watched her differently. Not suspiciously. Not looking for ammunition. Just clearly. Honestly. Without the filter of hope I'd been looking through for the past year. And what I saw was a pattern I could no longer pretend was random or situational. She pulled me close when she needed something, reassurance after a bad day, company when her weekend plans fell through, someone to process things with. She maintained deliberate distance when she didn't need anything. On weekends when her social calendar was full, I was barely reachable. On the nights her plans collapsed, cancellations, early evenings that didn't go the way she wanted, suddenly I was the most important thing in her orbit. I was the backup plan, the consistent, warm, reliable backup plan. And I was the only one in the relationship who hadn't fully understood that yet. Cole and I went for a run one morning in late February. About 2 miles in, slightly out of breath, he said, "You've gone quiet lately." Thinking, I said, "About what?" "About what I'm willing to accept." He ran alongside me for a few paces before answering. "What changed?" "Nothing changed," I said. "I just stopped pretending I couldn't see it." He nodded once. "He didn't say I told you so. He never does. That's one of the reasons I trust him with the real things." March came, and the kitchen moment came with it. We'd had a tense week leading up to it. Nothing explosive. We weren't the explosive kind. More like a cold pressure building steadily in the pipes, invisible until something gives. She'd canceled plans twice in 7 days. The second time, I'd been direct about it for the first time in months. No drama, just honesty. When you cancel twice in a row without much notice, it doesn't feel like I'm a priority. It feels like I'm optional. She'd gone quiet. Then she'd started explaining the events, the timing, the opportunities she simply couldn't pass on. All delivered with the patience of someone who believes they're being very reasonable. I'd said, "I'm not asking you to miss things. I'm asking you to communicate better and to actually show up sometimes." She hadn't liked that. So on the night it all landed, we were already standing on thin ice. She came over. She was in one of those particular moods that anyone who's been in this kind of dynamic would recognize immediately. Prickly, slightly above it all, entitled in a low-hum way that made the air in the room feel different. She sat on my counter while I was at the stove making dinner. We talked, if that's the right word for what we did. Mostly she talked. About her week, a new milestone in her follower count, a brand collaboration she was considering dropping, a trip she was thinking about taking in the spring. I listened. I cooked. I asked questions when they made sense. I was present. And then she mentioned the spring trip, a destination I hadn't heard anything about before that moment. I said, "I didn't know you were planning that. Are we going together? Or?" She looked at me with that particular expression. "I was thinking of going with Brooke and a few others." "Okay," I said. "That sounds like a good trip. Unless you want to come," she added. The way she said it, it wasn't an invitation. It was a concession, a barely offered one. Like I was a child asking to be included in something the adults had already settled among themselves. I turned back to the stove. "It's fine," I said. "I'll figure out something for that time." And that's when she said it. Casually, effortlessly, like it had been sitting just behind her teeth for a while, waiting for a moment like this one. "You know, sometimes I feel like you think you're irreplaceable." I kept stirring, the spoon in my hand, the smell of garlic and oil. "And I just want to be honest with you," she continued. "I can replace you anytime I want. Don't forget that." I turned off the burner, set down the spoon, turned around, and looked at her. She was watching me with that expression, confident, faintly bored, curious what I'd do, waiting for the reaction she expected, waiting for me to protest, to get upset, to scramble toward her and start listing my value like I was defending an application. And I smiled. Not a performance, a real one, because something became completely, suddenly, irreversibly clear in that second. She had said the quiet part out loud. She'd finally given me her honest assessment of me, of us, of what she believed this relationship was, and what she believed I was worth. And the feeling that moved through me wasn't devastation. It was relief. Because when someone finally confirms what you've been slowly realizing for months, the waiting ends. The doubt ends. The exhausting, grinding work of trying to see the best in something that's been consistently showing you its worst. That ends. "I know," I said. She blinked. "I know you can," I said. "And that's genuinely okay." She waited for more. There wasn't more. I started quietly putting food away. "What does that mean?" she said. "It means I heard you," I said. "And I think you should go." Silence. "Excuse me. You can replace me anytime you want," I said. "You've been very clear about that. So I think we're done here, Vanessa." She stared. "You're breaking up with me right now. Over this." "I think you broke up with me a while ago," I said. "I'm just finally catching up to where you've been." She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She picked up her bag. She looked at me. Really looked at me. and for 1 second I saw something on her face I hadn't seen in months. Uncertainty. She opened her mouth. Then she closed it. And she left. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood alone in my kitchen. The oil still warm in the pan. The garlic still in the air. I stood there for a long time. Then I put the food away. Then I sat down on the couch in the quiet. And for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, the apartment felt like mine. I won't pretend the weeks after were simple. Loving someone doesn't evaporate overnight just because clarity decides to show up. There were mornings where I reached for my phone out of pure habit before I remembered. There were songs that hit differently than they used to. There were moments at night where I second-guessed myself in the way that's almost impossible to avoid when something ends. Was I too rigid? Had I overreacted to one comment? Were the things I'd seen as clear as I believed they were? But then I'd remember safety net. I'd remember I have options. I'd remember boring boyfriend. I'd remember the way she'd looked at me in my own kitchen, confident, waiting, certain I would chase. And the doubt would settle back down. This was not a miscommunication. This was not a rough patch that needed patience and better timing. This was someone who had gradually, consistently decided that the person who showed up for her most reliably was also the person she held in the lowest regard. There is a particular kind of cruelty in that. Not the dramatic, obvious kind. The quiet kind. The daily kind. The kind that lives in interruptions and sighs and introductions where the word boyfriend never gets said. The kind that calls you a safety net at your own birthday party. I didn't miss her the way I'd anticipated. I missed who she'd been in the beginning. But I wasn't even sure anymore that version had ever been fully, authentically real. Maybe she had been real. Maybe something had genuinely changed her. Maybe the attention had slowly replaced something that used to be in her. Either way, that early version had been gone for over a year before the kitchen night. I'd just been holding onto the ghost of her, refusing to look at what was actually standing in the room. Here's something I didn't tell you yet. About 4 months into the relationship, before the following, before the brands, before any of it, there had been a moment I'd pushed down fast. We were at a party. Someone had been paying significant attention to her. A guy, clearly interested, putting in real effort. And I'd watched her light up in a way that was different from how she lit up around me. Not dramatically different. Subtly. But the contrast was there. I told myself, that's just her being social. That's her personality. She's naturally engaging with people. It doesn't mean anything. But something uncomfortable had flickered in me. And I'd pushed it down immediately. What I understand now, with the distance of where I'm standing, is that I'd been watching something from the very beginning. She was drawn to attention the way a compass is drawn to north. The more attention she received, the larger she felt. And the people in her life who gave her steady, quiet, unconditional presence, people like me, we didn't generate that feeling in her. We were the baseline. And the baseline becomes invisible when you're constantly orienting toward the next spike. That's not unique to her as a person. It's a human thing. It happens. But some people learn to recognize it in themselves and check it. And some people let it run every decision. She let it run the show. There was also something Qley had shared with me. Something he'd been sitting on and only told me after the breakup. About a conversation he'd had with her at the 6-month mark. They'd been briefly alone at a gathering. Maybe 3 minutes. And she'd said to him, "He really adores me, doesn't he?" Qley had said yes, because it was true. And she'd said, "It's sweet. I just hope he doesn't get too comfortable." Too comfortable. 6 months in. I was her boyfriend of 6 months. And she was hoping I wouldn't get too comfortable with that. Qley told me he'd second-guessed himself for a long time about what she'd meant. He'd hoped he was reading too much into it. He hadn't been reading too much into it. She'd been managing the distance from the beginning. Keeping just enough warmth so I'd stay. Just enough coolness so I'd stay slightly off balance. Not premeditated manipulation, not calculated scheming. More like instinct. The instinct of someone who'd learned at some point that a little withholding creates a little hunger. And hunger keeps people close. I'd been quietly hungry for over 2 years. Reaching for something that kept being almost within reach. I just hadn't named it until it was over. In the months after the kitchen night, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I got quiet. Not sad quiet. Not the quiet of someone wounded and waiting for things to change. Intentionally quiet. I started running again. Something I'd let drift during the relationship because my mornings had gradually reorganized around her schedule, her needs, her rhythms. I call my brother more. We drifted slightly over the course of the 2.5 years, the way things drift when one person's life gets slowly absorbed by a relationship. I went back to reading. Actual books. Not headlines scrolled between her posts. I cooked for myself properly, for the pleasure of it, not as an act of service for someone else. I worked properly, fully, on a project at work I'd been giving maybe 70% attention to for the better part of a year. And somewhere across those weeks, not in one moment, but gradually, the way light changes in a room without you watching, I started feeling like myself again. The version that hadn't been slowly edited down to fit into a shrinking space. Cole noticed it before I did. "You seem different," he said, about 6 weeks after the kitchen night. "Hey," I said. A pause. "I know you haven't responded to my messages." "Yeah, I get it. I really do." Another pause. "Longer. I've been wanting to just, can you give me 15 minutes? In person? Not a big thing. Just 15 minutes. I thought about it for a genuine moment. "Why?" I asked. Not hostile. Honestly curious. Because what I have to say isn't the kind of thing you put in a text message. I agreed to meet her. Not because I was hoping for something. Not because I was leaving a door open. But because I was curious. The way you're curious about the resolution of something that's been sitting unfinished at the edge of your awareness. We met at a coffee shop. Not the one we used to go to. A different one. She was there when I arrived, already sitting, hands wrapped around a mug. She looked good. She always looked good. But something about her was quieter than I remembered. The particular brand of confidence she used to wear like a second outfit, the kind that had just a hint of aggression beneath it, was smaller, more fragile. I sat down. She looked at me for a moment. And then she said, "I want to start by telling you I'm sorry." I waited. "What I said in your kitchen. I can replace you anytime I want." I've thought about that sentence every single day since I said it. And I hate that I said it. Not because of how it makes me look. Because of what it meant I'd become. I didn't fill the silence. I was in a place where everything felt like it was accelerating. The page, the brand work, the attention, and I think I started to believe my own story. That I was too much for you. Too fast-moving, too ambitious, too exciting. Like you couldn't keep pace with the life I was building. And now, I said. She looked down at her mug. Now I know that was the most arrogant, backwards thing I could have possibly believed. She paused. Let it breathe. I've been on dates since then. Spent time with other people. I've had exactly the kind of options I was bragging about. I nodded. I'd figured as much. And not one of them, not a single one, knew me the way you did. The things I'd say, the references I'd make, the way I think, they'd give me a reaction that was completely off. Because they didn't have the context. They didn't have the history of us. They didn't know me. She looked up. I'd tell a story and they'd laugh in the wrong place. Or they'd ask a follow-up that proved they hadn't actually been listening. Or they'd say something that felt like they were talking to a version of me they'd assembled from my posts. Not the actual me. They didn't have 2.5 years, I said. No, she said quietly. They didn't have you. The noise of the coffee shop moved around us. Then she said, I think I confused taking you for granted with being independent. I told myself your steadiness was boring instead of recognizing that your steadiness was the thing that made me feel safe enough to be everything else I was being. And I punished you for it. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. It landed with real weight. I could feel the difference between this and the managed apologies of before. I sat with it. Then I said, I believe you. Something lit briefly in her expression. But, she said, but believing you and going back aren't the same decision. She exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding that breath since she sat down. I know, she said. I know they're not. You said I could replace you anytime, I said. And you were right. Anyone can replace anyone. People do it all the time. But what I kept thinking about after you left wasn't whether I'd be replaced. It was how little I'd started to value myself by the end. Because someone who genuinely loves you doesn't make you feel replaceable. They make you feel chosen. Every day, in small ways, they make you feel chosen. She didn't argue. She didn't have a comeback or a reframe. She just looked at me with something that I can only describe as grief. Quiet grief for something that couldn't be retrieved. I wasn't choosing you, she said, barely above the noise of the room. I know that now. Yeah, I said. I know it too. We finished our coffees. She asked how I was. I told her the truth, genuinely good. Better than I'd been in a long time, actually. She said she could tell. Said I looked different. Lighter. She asked if there was any possibility, any version of things where we tried again. I told her honestly that I didn't know. And that was the most truthful answer I had for her. Not a door slammed shut and bolted. Not a door thrown open. Just the truth. I didn't go back. I want to be clear about that. Because this isn't the kind of story where the person who hurt you returns changed and everything resets to something clean. Life doesn't work that cleanly. She had done real work. Real thinking. I believed the apology. I believed she meant what she said about what she'd lost. But believing someone has changed and choosing to rebuild what they broke, those are two separate calculations. And I'd done too much of my own work by then to walk back into the same room. I'd rebuilt too much of what I'd quietly let erode across those 2.5 years. My time felt like mine again. My mornings, my attention, my mental space. The version of myself that had learned to make himself smaller to fit around her moods and her schedule and her need for options. I wasn't willing to put him back in that position. Not out of anger, not out of punishment, out of self-knowledge. I knew what I was worth now, not in an arrogant way, not as some performance of moving on. In the quiet, settled way that you know the value of something once you've lost it and then found it again. I knew what kind of love I was actually capable of receiving. The kind where you don't spend half your mental energy wondering where you stand. The kind where you're not the punchline. The kind where someone introduces you and doesn't edit you out. The kind where "I can replace you" never forms in someone's mind, let alone comes out of their mouth. Cole asked me about the coffee shop meeting a few days after. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. Actually thought about it. Like I graduated from something, I said. He nodded slowly. "That's exactly what it sounds like," he said. "There's a thing that happens when you get enough real distance from a relationship like the one I just described. You stop being the person it happened to. And you start being the person who learned from it." I thought about the version of me who'd stood in that kitchen, patient, hoping, making dinner for someone who had privately decided months ago that I was a safety net with a good attitude. I felt tenderness toward that version of myself. Not pity, not embarrassment, tenderness. Because he wasn't naive or foolish. He was just someone who believed in people longer than they'd earned. And that's not a flaw. That's a quality. The challenge is finding people who are actually worth giving it to. I thought about the October dinner where Brooke had seen it before I did. I thought about the birthday party where she'd said "safety net" to Cole like it was a compliment. I thought about "I have options." I thought about "boring boyfriend." I thought about every time she talked over me and every time I'd let it go. Each of those moments, at the time, had felt ambiguous. I'd been able to build a case for the charitable interpretation. I'd been able to tell myself I was reading too much into it. But they weren't ambiguous. They were a sequence. A slow, consistent message from someone who had made up her mind about my value long before I'd made up mine about hers. I'm not angry about it anymore, but I filed it. Because the next time someone begins constructing a quiet case for why I'm not quite enough, I'll recognize the language earlier. I won't wait for the kitchen. I won't give it 2.5 years. About 2 weeks after the coffee shop, she sent one more message. "I keep thinking about what you said. About being chosen. I think about how bad I was at that. How consistently bad. And I just wanted you to know that I think whoever gets to be chosen by you is going to be very lucky." I read it, and I felt nothing charged. No anger. No longing. No pull. Just a quiet, clean acknowledgement. I wrote back, "I think you're going to figure out what you actually want. Take care of yourself, Vanessa." She responded a few hours later, "You too." And the conversation ended. Not dramatically. Not painfully. The way things end when they are genuinely, completely over. Like a door that closes so quietly, you only know it's shut because the draft is gone. It's been about 7 months since the kitchen night as I write this. I'm not in a new relationship. I'm not in a hurry to be. I spend my mornings the way I actually want to. I run. I read. I have dinner with people who make me feel like I'm in exactly the right place. Cole and I have a standing Saturday thing now. Coffee. A slow walk. No agenda. It sounds small. It isn't small. I've come to understand that what I'd been missing across those 2.5 years wasn't just a girlfriend who was present. It was a version of myself who was present. I'd given so much of my mental and emotional attention to managing the temperature of that relationship. Always reading the room, always adjusting, always trying to thread the needle between what I needed and what wouldn't make her pull away, that I'd gradually stopped tending to the things that made me who I am. I'm tending again, and it feels, not in a dramatic way, not in a way I could put in a caption, genuinely like being alive again. Like something that had been running on low power for a long time has been plugged back in. I don't think Vanessa is a villain. I've said that out loud to myself enough times that I actually mean it. She was someone who received a lot of a particular kind of attention at a particular time in her life and let it decide who she was. That happens to people. It changes them in ways they don't always see coming. Whether she grows from it or not, that's not my watch anymore. My watch now runs on a different clock, one that tracks things that actually matter. She thought she was telling me I was replaceable. What she actually did was remind me of my own worth at the exact moment I'd been the closest to forgetting it completely. And that smile I gave her in the kitchen, that wasn't weakness. That wasn't confusion. That was the first real breath of someone who just realized the cage was open. Some people leave your life and take something with them when they go. She left, and left me with everything I'd quietly given away.